Hello, my name is Tommy Pigott. Welcome to the Republican Rundown. This week, given Biden's repeated trips out west to talk about housing costs, we thought that it would be important to break down the facts of what actually Biden's saying versus the reality. So here's what Biden said during his trip out west talking about housing.
But we have a lot more to do. For too many people, the dream of having a good home still feels out of reach. I get it.
It feels out of reach because Bidenomics is making it further out of reach for millions of Americans. Now, we're going to get into the stats in a second, but we think it's important to outline the standard we'll be using, which is what's the reality on the ground? After many years of Biden's policies, what are we actually seeing? And this isn't our standard. This is Biden's own standard from when he first became president or towards the beginning of his term back in 2021.
Talking inflation. The overwhelming consensus is going to pop up a little bit and then go back down. No one's talking about this great, So, again, if it turns out that what I've done so far, what we've done so far, is a mistake, it's going to show.
If it's a mistake, it's going to show. What is the reality on the ground? And that's the standard we're going to be using when looking at housing costs, especially since Joe Biden is making it a central issue of his Bidenomics pitch. When you look at housing costs, according to real estate data providers, 99% of the country is now deemed unaffordable under Joe Biden. According to a new Zillow report, the average homebuyer needs to make over $106,000 to afford the monthly mortgage payment on a typical U.S. home. That is up from $59,000 under President Trump. That means that the average homebuyer needs to have 80% more income, needs to make 80% more to afford a home. That is disastrous for the American dream. Now, Biden might respond and say that's because interest rates have increased. That's true, interest rates have increased. Interest rates have increased mortgage payments. Why have they increased mortgage payments? Because of inflation. Now, the Fed has increased mortgage payments to the highest rate in 23 years. For the exact same home, Americans are now paying double on a monthly mortgage payment because of interest rates. But even Joe Biden himself recognized the connection between inflation and interest rates this week during a campaign stop.
Inflation keeps coming down, and it's predicted to do that. Mortgage rates are going to come down as well.
So if you caught that there, Biden was recognizing that as inflation goes, so do interest rates. Now, he was falsely saying that they're making progress on inflation. Inflation has remained stubbornly and outrageously high for 35 months. But Biden did concede that because inflation rates rose, interest rates followed. So the increase in interest rates was directly because of inflation. Now I have to look at what caused inflation. And even in the words of liberal economists, Biden's agenda fueled inflation to the highest levels in 40 years. And again, this is not Republicans, the RNC just saying this. These are liberal and Democrat economists who warned Biden at the time not to waste money, not to spend $1.9 trillion as soon as he came into office, and yet he did anyway. Here are some of their comments. Former Obama and Clinton economist Larry Summers said that the tremendous wall of money that Democrats released last spring has led to inflation. Former Obama economist Jason Furman said that Biden's spending is too big, and he doesn't know any economists who supported that much. Former Obama economic advisor Stephen Ratner said that Biden's spending was the original sin of inflation, and that it contributed materially to today's inflation levels. He went on to say that this is Biden's inflation and he needs to own it. Again, that is a Democrat economist. Biden's own Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen said that Biden's $1.9 trillion stimulus was one of the factors that were involved in inflation. Again, that's a member of Biden's own administration that is saying this. So high interest rates have contributed to the cost of buying a new home. But those high interest rates were in response to the historic inflation fueled by Joe Biden's agenda. And again, that's not just Republicans saying that. Biden's own administration has admitted it. And on top of that, the supply of homes up for sale is being hit. Homeowners that currently own a home and are looking to maybe move somewhere else are delaying that choice because of the high interest rates. They want to keep that mortgage payment they have on their current home that they locked in before inflation, before interest rates. They want to keep that in place. On top of that, the price of building a new home is skyrocketing because of the increased cost of the materials going into that home, because of the inflation regarding construction materials. Lumber, for example, the inflation around lumber is increasing the cost of building a new home by up to $36,000. just because of inflation. So we're seeing decreasing supplies of new homes, higher interest rates, and higher inflation, all making it much harder to buy a home. And on top of all of that, if that wasn't enough, Biden's regulations and policies want to make it harder to buy simple appliances and operate a home. His regulations on things like gas stoves, dishwashers, laundries, they're going to add thousands, tens of thousands of dollars to the price of your bill when you're buying these appliances. So when you're looking to buy a new home, not only are you contending with those higher mortgage rates, not only are you contending with that inflation, you're contending with Biden's regulations that are adding tens of thousands of dollars to the prices of new appliances. And on top of all of that, on top of Biden's inflation, on top of his regulations, Biden wanted to punish homeowners with good credit who are saving to buy a home, and a real attack on the American dream. Here's Larry Kudlow on Fox Business explaining that policy.
Biden's war against success. The administration now is going to hike payments for good credit home buyers in order to subsidize high-risk mortgages. That's right. New federal rules from the Federal Housing Finance Agency, which is Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and they control about 60% of the housing mortgage market. Those rules go into place May 1st. If you have improved, you're not going to believe this, folks. If you have improved your FICO credit score to 680 or higher, or if you have made a down payment of 15 or 20%, you'll be penalized with higher mortgage interest rates and new large fees on the transaction. This is an outrage. This is an attack on the American dream.
That proposed policy was only rescinded after backlash from Republicans and Americans across the board. But those are the types of policies that Biden wants to put in place. Policies that fuel inflation, policies that therefore increase interest rates, policies that make it harder to buy everyday appliances, and policies that punish Americans who are saving and are pursuing the American dream. So you might be thinking to yourself, I'm just going to wait. I'm just going to wait until interest rates come down. I'm not going to buy a home. I'm going to rent. Unfortunately, the picture for renters is not much better. Since Biden took office, rent prices have increased 20%. 20%. We now have over 50% of people that are paying rent considered rent burdened, meaning over half of renters right now are finding it difficult to afford where they live, all because of those increased costs. Now, if you listen to Biden, he wants to lecture Americans for not saving enough money. That's his solution to this problem. Here he is talking about retirement, but a similar principle can be applied to buying a home.
Now, I would argue that most people, an awful lot of people, not the people in this room, but an awful lot of people don't think about that retirement when they're 20, 30, and 40 years old. But here's what it means. Many Americans spend their whole lives working, putting every dime left at the end of the month in their retirement account.
For decades, surveys showed that saving for retirement was the top concern of Americans. But because of inflation, because of increased costs, now it's just making it to the end of the month. Now it's just being able to afford emergencies. Here's CNBC talking about the new reality for Americans because of Bidenomics.
Having enough emergency savings and paying monthly bills, get this, have unseated saving for retirement as the #1 concern for workers between the ages of 21 and 64, according to a new survey.
The average American household is now spending about $12,000 more per year for the exact same standard of living because of inflation and Bidenomics. And on top of all of that, real weekly wages on average are down 4.2% under Joe Biden. So Americans are contending with increasing costs. They're contending with lower real wages. And the result is lower savings and higher debt levels. Under Joe Biden, the savings rate has plummeted to a historic low, and debt levels have skyrocketed. For the first time ever, credit card debt has passed $1 trillion on Joe Biden's watch. That's the reality for American families, and Joe Biden's lecturing Americans on savings. Millions of Americans can't save because they can barely afford the increased cost of living, fueled again by Biden's agenda. Now, looking with all this in totality, Biden can try to shift blame all he wants. He can try to deny the facts. But ultimately, his argument to you is that Bidenomics is working.
And guess what? Bidenomics is working.
Bidenomics is not working, and the facts show it. This has been the Republican Rundown. We'll be back next week.
Guess what?
Bidenomics is working.